I, 19, female, grew up really poor, seriously poor. My dad lost his job during mass layoffs in his company just a few months after my older sister Stella, fake name, 24, female, was born, and my mother was a stay at home mom, so she never had any money of her own to begin with. He took up another job, but it paid significantly less. That's where the struggle began, apparently, and then 5 years later, I was born. It was made clear to me from a really young age that I wasn't wanted in the family because I was an accident, and the only reason my mother had decided to keep me was because she believed that terminating the pregnancy would have been the wrong thing to do. So I was born into poverty, and I lived in a house where my parents had one room and my sister and I had to share the pull-out couch at night. To say that my family was toxic would be an understatement. Not just my parents, but also their relatives would treat me like a second-class citizen in my own house, so it never really felt like my own home. I tried hard to get them to notice me and be proud of me, but nothing was ever enough. Stella was the star, and she was the one who had all the hopes and dreams of the family pinned on her. But to put it bluntly, she really didn't work half as hard as I did, so her grades weren't that great either. Despite that, she was the star and I was a nobody simply because my parents just refused to look at me as anything other than a burden. There was another person who was treated the same way by my family, and that was my cousin Sam. He had a good few years with me, almost 8, and yet he was treated just like I was, which made me realize that my family's behavior wouldn't change with time. He was my maternal aunt's son who had lost her husband to a heart attack when he was young and was living off of whatever he'd left her. She hated Sam because he couldn't hold down a job for more than 3 months because he was always too distracted and lost. I can't blame the guy because he was a musical genius, and I actually really liked Sam because despite being so much older than me, he treated me with respect and would talk to me like an adult. Whenever my aunt would come over, we would talk to each other and try to forget the fact that our families hated us. It was nice to spend time with him, and even though Stella didn't get us, she tried to be a part of our little circle as well. So growing up, it was the 3 of us, but eventually Stella started staying out with her friends from school more and we saw less of her. My mistreatment continued and even got worse when Stella was supposed to go to college and my mother realized that she'd have to attend her safety school because her first choice was too expensive. This was somehow my fault, and I got an earful because of that. But when I tried to defend myself, my mother actually slapped me right across the face and nobody said anything about it. I'd been hit before, but they'd just be little raps on the knuckles or a slap on the back of my head if I wasn't paying attention. Never a full-blown slap, so that was shocking for me. But I learned to keep my mouth shut after that. I was 13 at the time, but I still haven't forgotten how that slap stung for hours physically and for days emotionally. Stella graduated with decent grades 3 years later and was about to start her first job but couldn't, since she found out that she was 6 weeks pregnant at the time. Unfortunately for Stella and her baby, the guy who was supposed to be the dad had graduated already and had returned to his country since he was a foreign exchange student. So her baby's father wouldn't be in the picture since she couldn't even find him because he'd blocked her as soon as she told him the news. Now she was going to have to raise her kid all on her own. At that time, I was 16 and was already working part-time jobs to contribute to the family, but when Stella moved back home pregnant, the pressure started building on me and my parents started treating me even worse. By then, Sam had already moved out. He'd graduated from college and was working at a restaurant to make ends meet. I'd keep in touch with him and would tell him all about my problems, and he'd try his very best to console me, but that's all that he could do because he had his own life as well. Finally, the baby came along, and a week after that, my mother actually snatched my niece away from me and told me that I didn't deserve to be around her since I was the reason Stella and her daughter had to be cooped up in the tiny living room. Because I had no shame and continued to live with them despite being told time and again that they didn't want me at all, that was the day that I finally argued back with my mother and told her that I had every right to live in that house because they were the ones who chose to have me. And she told me that similarly, she had every right to say whatever she wanted to me because she brought me into this world and raised me, even though I was an ungrateful brat. She said a lot of other crap that I don't want to repeat, but I knew that day itself that I just had to get out of that damn house somehow. So I packed whatever little stuff I owned and set out to go to Sam's place. He lived in a really small town apartment with a roommate and was surprised to see me there. But when I told him that I just couldn't go back anymore and that I couldn't take the mistreatment anymore, he didn't turn me away even though he knew it'd be tough for me. I left just 1.5 years of school anyway, and because I went to public school, it was free of cost and I could afford to leave my parents' home. It was difficult, I'm not going to lie. We had to live on a tight budget because there's only so much money that a waiter makes, and I was really worried about what I do for college as well since I had an aversion to student loans. But then, a week before I graduated high school, a miracle happened. And even when I think about it now, I feel like the universe was just looking out for me all along. Sam's grandparents, his dad's parents, had cut his mother off after his dad's death because of her nasty behavior, which isn't surprising because she is my mom's sister after all. And to retaliate, she denied them any right to keep in touch with or visit Sam. So he lost touch with him after his dad's death, which happened when he was really young, and he'd only been able to reconnect with his grandmother, who somehow managed to track him down with the help of her lawyer when she was on her deathbed. His grandfather had passed away a few years after his dad, and the only surviving member was his grandmother, who passed away eventually as well. They'd left him their house, all the money that they'd set aside for him throughout their lives, and a few other expensive items of jewelry. Sam inherited all of it and ended up with a crazy amount of money that neither of us had expected. Of course, he was really sad that he hadn't been able to properly reconnect with his grandmother until she was on her deathbed, but there was finally a solution to all our financial troubles now. We still continued to live frugally and tried to save as much as we could, but Sam took up the guitar again, and I started looking for colleges to go to, which also offered scholarships just to be on the safe side. My grades were great, so I was able to get into a good college, and I'm in my second year currently. I did get a scholarship, and I also have a part-time job as a tutor. Sam took music lessons for a year or so, and after playing a few gigs here and there alongside his waiter job, he managed to land a job as a music instructor at a fancy private school for much better pay. So right now we're not exactly rich, but we're doing way better than we used to be, and I'm truly grateful for all the help that Sam has offered me throughout the years. He really deserves this, and more. I haven't kept in touch with my parents, but Stella and I never removed or blocked each other anywhere. We never spoke to one another either, though. She hadn't protested or even tried to get me to stay the day I left home, so I didn't think that I had anything left to say to her anyway. I was disappointed but not surprised because even though I did love her and she claimed she loved me too, she never really stood up for me. My niece is a little older than 3 and I've watched her grow on social media, but I haven't been back to see her in person. It was sad, but I'd come to terms with the fact that this is the most I'd get out of my family and had given up any hope of reconciliation. However, about 3 weeks ago, Stella reached out to me right after I posted that Sam had bought me a new phone. It wasn't very expensive, but it was my birthday, and my old phone was battered. So he got me a new one, and I was excited about it, and I decided to post it. I didn't expect it to get any reaction at all, but Stella did reach out to me to congratulate me. I thanked her, and I thought that would be it. But she struck up a conversation with me and was being really sweet, so I ended up talking to her for a while. I didn't want to admit it, but I had missed her and my niece, so it felt nice to talk to someone I'd grown up with and was used to. Sam was a great older brother, but our age gap was significant and he was also just really busy. I loved him, but I also missed my sister and did want to see her one more time. So when Stella asked if I'd be willing to catch up over coffee the next weekend, I agreed without thinking twice, and we met for coffee a couple of days later. She'd brought her daughter along, and I was thrilled to see her, as was my niece. We got to talking and had a nice time, but when it was time to go home, Stella teared up. That was a little concerning, and when I asked her about it, she told me that our mother was really sick and she'd been asking about me quite often. Even Dad missed me and asked about me several times a week. She told me that everyone at home wanted me back, but I wasn't convinced. I hadn't forgotten the way I'd been treated when I used to live with them and refused to be talked into going back. Unfortunately, right then, Stella played her trump card. My niece told me that she'd be glad if I came back and had dinner with the family just for one day. With tears in her eyes, she asked me to come back and at least give them one last chance. If not for their sake, then for my niece's sake, since she didn't want her daughter to grow up without knowing her wonderful aunt. She also mentioned that her daughter was having difficulty reading and feared that she was dyslexic, so she needed my help to tutor her since I'd always been a bright student, and she knew I'd tutor kids even in college. She insisted that her daughter needed help and that it means the world to them if I agreed to come back home with them. After a while, I couldn't just say no anymore, because Stella was trying really hard to get me to give them a chance, so I agreed to go home with her for dinner. She told me that they'd moved out of their old house and into a newer one, but didn't mention how she'd managed to buy an apartment so soon. She didn't tell me anything about her job either, which was weird, but I was too anxious about going back home for the first time to think about any of that. Stella didn't inform anyone at home, but when I arrived, my parents were acting like they'd been expecting me, which should have tipped me off. My mother had even brought out the nice crockery for me and was being very sweet to me, which felt really weird. After some small talk, she finally asked me about my phone and what I'd been doing all these years. So I told her that Sam had bought me the new phone, and currently I was in the second year of my third year business degree, after which I'd start looking for a job. I told them that I was living with Sam now, but didn't elaborate, and they didn't seem to care either, because the very next thing that my mother brought up was that they'd had to sell the old house we used to live in because times were getting hard, and were currently living in this apartment on rent. Even my aunt, Sam's mother, had sold her house, and they were all living together in this small apartment. I didn't say much to that, but she started telling me that now that my dad was close to retirement and they were burning through their savings fast, I could sense that she was building up to something and was about to take my leave when she finally stopped beating about the bush and told me that now, since Sam and I were making a decent living, we should consider contributing to their household to repay them for whatever they'd done for us. I didn't know what to say, and slowly I realized that this was just a way to get me to come back home for money. None of the things that Stella had said about my family missing me and wanting me back were true at all, and I'd been tricked. So I told them that I wouldn't be able to help and got up to leave, but my mother told me that I needed to stay for dinner. I insisted that I wasn't hungry and just wanted to get back home, but my mother lost her cool and told me that I needed to stay and pay them so they'd be able to make rent on time this month. She was really rude, and any trace of the extra sweet woman who greeted me at the door when I arrived was gone. I was really disappointed and decided to confront my sister and ask her if this was what she meant when she said that our parents really miss me. But Stella refused to even look me in the eye. Instead, my mother replied to that and told me that they really couldn't care less about me, but I had to pay them back for whatever they'd done for me throughout my childhood, and that she'd been the one who had told Stella to go meet me and get me to come back home so we could talk. She accused me of being selfish and told me that if Sam and I could afford to live on our own and buy fancy gadgets, my phone isn't even expensive, it's a mid-range phone with very basic features, then we had enough money to spare to help our families too. She told me that we owe this to them, and my aunt and dad told me that we had to arrange it by the end of this week. I was shocked by the sheer audacity of their demands and just snapped at them. I told my mother that I actually wished she and her entire family would get kicked to the street. Apart from my niece, of course, because the only thing she did wrong was that she was born to someone like Stella. My mom got mad and started cursing at me and even tried to slap me again, but I grabbed her arm midair and pushed her back with as much force as I could. She fell back onto the couch, and taking advantage of everyone's shock, I decided to make a run for it in the aftermath. I ran to the next bus stop and took the first bus I could get on. Thankfully, nobody followed me and I was able to get home safely. Sam hasn't been in touch with his mom ever since he left home, and I haven't told him about any of this because I'm scared he might be disappointed in my weakness and stupidity, and even worse, Stella sent me a message about how awful I'd been to our family and accused me of physically attacking them. It was literally self-defense, but I should have known that they'd find a way to use it against me somehow. My mother probably even tried to hit me so that she'd somehow get a reaction out of me and instigate me, essentially. Now I don't really care about any of them, but Stella told me that they really need the money as soon as possible because they'll be kicked out otherwise, and she doesn't want that life for her daughter. She's working as a babysitter, so that barely covers the bills, and everyone else has already pulled their money to be able to pay the bills and cover their expenses for the past couple of years, but they just couldn't do it on their own. I don't want to help them out at all, but I also don't want my niece to suffer. It's been a week and I still haven't done anything about any of this. I haven't told Sam and I haven't been able to decide whether to help my family or not. If I'm being honest, I'm not inclined towards giving them money because they haven't done jack for me like they're claiming, apart from making my life a nightmare that I had to escape a few years ago. They were all toxic as hell and didn't have any respect for anyone at all. But now that Sam and I were finally doing well, they were here to claim their share even though we owe them nothing. It doesn't seem fair, and I don't think they're entitled to anything at all. So AITA for not wanting to help my toxic family, including my 3-year-old niece out, with money after they mistreated me for years growing up, but are now on the verge of homelessness. Update 1. Hey, so I decided not to help them. And I also told Sam everything that had happened last week, like everyone here had told me to. Luckily, he was nice about it and didn't make me feel stupid for falling for Stella's little act at all. He told me that it was natural for people to miss their families no matter how toxic they were, simply because that's what we'd been used to for the longest time, and had been taught to believe that we owed them love and affection no matter how they treated us just because we were connected by blood. But it's a process to unlearn these things, and I'll get there somehow. He comforted me and reassured me that I wasn't a terrible person for not wanting to help my family. They're using my niece to play the victim card, but I don't need to help them if I feel bad for her. If they do get evicted and end up being homeless, then I can just call CPS and get them to rehome my niece if that's what I want for her. But the bottom line is, I don't need to feel guilty for turning them away when they ask for help, and that helped because I've been feeling immensely guilty about everything. Thanks to everyone who commented on my post too. It was really kind of you guys to try and comfort me. And it did help to know that I'm not the only one out there who's had a childhood like this. It's sad, but it's also comforting to know that I'm never on my own. Update 2. Sam and I have been trying to forget about that whole episode that happened with our families 2 weeks back. But unfortunately, Stella just won't let go and keeps texting me relentlessly. I've tried blocking her, but she just started texting me from another number. I even tried to change my number, but then she switched to making fake profiles and started sending messages from those profiles nonstop. Now, I could have deactivated my account altogether, but that just didn't make sense, and Sam agreed. We hadn't done anything wrong, so why did we have to go into hiding like we were the villains here? So I decided to finally respond to her once and for all. I unblocked her number, called her up, and informed her that if she texted me again, that I'd report her for stalking and harassment, and that'd be even worse for her than whatever situation she was in currently. She started arguing with me and accusing me of being selfish to the core, so I decided to remind her of what she'd done to me in the past. She'd never stood up for me because she wanted to continue being the golden child for our parents. She manipulated me and used her daughter to get me to come back home just so that our mother could attack me once more as if my childhood was not traumatizing enough. And as if that wasn't bad enough, she continued to text me and demand that I cover her and her family's rent when they hadn't ever done anything to help me and Sam out when we needed it. I told her to rot in hell and then disconnected the call, finally feeling a lot more relieved. She hasn't called me since then, and I hope it stays that way because I don't think I'd be able to stand it anymore. Update 3. Hey everyone, so this update is going to be very short because it's just some good news that I wanted to share. So Sam's organizing a musical for the school and it's going to be massive, which means there's going to be a huge raise for him now, and they might even make it an annual thing. He's told me there's already a lot of buzz about it among his students, so he's optimistic about the reception, and I'm thrilled for him. Fingers crossed, this opportunity will be the start of something great for both of us. As for my family, I don't know what became of them because they didn't bother to contact me, but thankfully, I found out from a friend who happens to know one of Stella's friends that she's given my niece to her to take care of for a couple of weeks. So I'm assuming they did get kicked out, but she had the good sense to put my niece in a safe environment before that happened. I've told that friend of mine to keep me in the loop about her, and I'm hoping that the poor girl doesn't have to suffer the way I did. I might try to do something for her once I graduate, but I don't know. For now, I'm just hoping that everything works out well. Stay tuned for more stories from Argo Relationships.